So going back though, I mean, you obviously endured a lot. I mean, you said your first time use was around, did you say 10 or 11?
Yeah, 11.
11 years old. So, I mean, you obviously started at a very young age. And I mean, I appreciate you being open and vulnerable about the, the traumatic experience you went through. And I'm sorry that you had to face that, but that drove you down a road to, again, from that age to 19 to coming out here. Where did that road end up taking you?
Yeah, so I think what's really important is to be able to recognize your underlying issues that bring you into addiction. And for me, my underlying issues were my trauma at a very young age. I feel that was a triggering event in my life that led me down the path that I went down. For me, it was numbing myself out to not have to deal with how I was feeling. And I started doing that at a very young age. Suicide attempts, just trying to run away from whatever I could. And so it led me down a really dark path. And by the time I had come out here, I was so just down in that rabbit hole of addiction. And it was scary because I was still, quote unquote, a functioning addict. I was out doing things. I was working. I had a car. I had a house. I had money. I had all these things. But I was dying while I was still alive on the inside. I was completely numbed out. I wasn't dealing with any of my trauma. I was carrying around an immense amount of anger, resentment, and pain from my past. I hadn't come to a place of forgiveness or even really wanting to process what had happened to me. I was just mad, and I was a victim. And I think it's really important to be able to get to a point where we can recognize the underlying issues and then realize you don't want to be a victim anymore. You want to be a survivor. And how are you going to do that? So it took me a long time. I used actively for over 20 years in LA, up and down, trying to do a movie part here or there, trying to go do a one-liner on a TV show. And that led me down a path where I just wanted to make money and just be numbed out. So I got involved in another industry. I was contracted with Playboy. Jenna Jameson was one of my best friends. I'd be running around with her, and it was all bad. I had an AKA, and who I am today is nothing compared to what I was before, meaning I had no self-worth, no confidence. And it's funny because when I look back on it, I think, I was so easy and just so willing to get undressed on camera or do whatever it was that I did. And I thought, this is so cool. I can go do this topless magazine and I can make all this money. And it's so cool because I don't care to be topless. And I didn't recognize what that really meant. And that meant that I had been traumatized as a child and carried that into my adulthood. They say most people that go into that line of work, they have been traumatized as a child,
Right.
Sexually is usually what the case is. So, I didn't have any sense of self, and I went down that path for a very long time. I had my son in 2008, went into rehab when he was 8 months old, came out of that and did everything I could to try to not go back to that industry. I started, I'm fully covered in tattoos under this. So I started tattooing myself, thinking I wouldn't be able to book any jobs. I was still able to book jobs. It was all these excuses and reasons. It was, that in itself was an addiction too. But then I finally got sober 4.5 years ago, and completely turned my life around. But it took getting to that point of complete surrender and willingness. And,
what was that? I mean, again, there's so much I want to connect on that, but what was that turning point? I mean, I can relate to that self-sabotaging and looking at, I'm going to do this, this, and this to try to change this. But in reality, I was not taking the simple steps of the surrender, being fully open and honest with myself. What was that point though for you where you're just like, okay, because it sounds like you're in 2008, right? You had your son. I can relate to that. Having a daughter. I was literally on the first floor at Hogue in detox while my wife's water broke, and she was up at the fourth floor giving birth to our child. And that wasn't enough, for me to stop. So what was that turning point for you?
Right. And I think a bottom for everyone, it's different. Like I had so many bottoms that people would have thought that's the bottom, but it was more of a moment of spiritual awakening in my mind of just complete surrender. There was many other times it seemed way worse, but this moment, I had this clarity. I was at an ex-boyfriend's house. I had a gun in one hand and I had my life in the other hand. And I knew that if I didn't choose life right in that moment and get help, that I was going to die. And so at that moment, I chose to live and I went into treatment, and that's it after that. So, it's when I had my son, I thought I would stay sober for him. A lot of people think they'll stay sober for their children. I know this sounds so selfish and awful, but that's what addiction is. It's selfish and it's trying to kill us. And we can't stay sober for our children. We have to stay sober for ourselves first and foremost. So, yeah.